Willie Mae Stokes, 67 years old, testified that she lived in the Lower Ninth Ward. Over 20 feet of water covered her home. That she needs $138,000, they tell her, to rebuild that home, which only cost $6,000 when she built it. That she will only get $17,000 in insurance. That there's $30,000 promised by the government to raise it, even though she won't get it or hasn't gotten it. That the government is supposed to give her $70,000 to help rebuild her home, but she hasn't received it, doesn't know when she will receive it, and when she does receive it, she's going to have to pay them back some of it because of living expenses which she had to encounter. This is not meeting up to those requirements when we realize that they're still spending $450 billion to kill people in Iraq. The violation of human rights is the second group to adequate housing in Group 6 that we have brought these charges. Charge group number 7 says the violation of human rights to adequate standard of living and freedom from poverty, the guideline principles or the guiding principles of international displacement. Article 6, sections 1 and 3 are relevant here too, that talk about the displacement of people. What causes this delay is that the United States has no commitment to rebuilding the lives of Katrina survivors. They have no commitment to doing the things that the international covenant requires them to do. They don't have a commitment since Katrina, and they didn't have a commitment before Katrina. That testimony is brought to us briefly before the technological difficulties from Robert V., who talks about the levee, and he says the levee was never any good, that the levee was not prepared to withstand the storms, that the government knew the levee could not withstand the storms, and that they had history to prove that the levee could not withstand the storms, and that money was actually allocated in order to make some minimum improvement to the levee, but the levee was never repaired, but the money probably went to some war effort. We talk about the crushing of culture, and I'm going to move on somewhat summarily to pass through these because I know the good jurists have looked very vigilantly at these things. But we talk about the crushing of culture, and culture is important. Culture is everything you do. I think someone quoted Amilcar Cabral and said that culture is the seed of revolution, is the seed of the people. Culture is the spirit of the revolution. That's what culture is. But the United States wants no revolution. It does not even want survival. And so what is it to the United States? What is it to the city of New Orleans, which is controlled by functionaries of the United States? What is it to the state of Louisiana to crush the culture of Sharice Marie Harrelson Nelson? To crush the culture, a beautiful culture of the Mardi Gras Indians. And what is this Mardi Gras Indian culture anyway? How beautiful is it to represent in a group of people the coming together of one of the magnificent unities in history? The unity of the African seeking to escape slavery with the Indian trying to comfort them from slavery and to take them in for slavery. One of the magnificent period of history when blood met blood and they came together and they created the Seminole Nation. They created the United Unities, and Africans in the Cherokee tribe, Africans in the Choctaw tribe, Africans and various different other Indian nations which came together. And these were people who would not forget that history, and so what they did is they canonized that history. They incorporated that history, but it was just a history waiting to be stricken by a disaster, or perhaps an episode with the New Orleans police in the street, or with any other of the various different armaments of imperialism. We see how the children were traumatized. Do not forget, and as you go back to deliberate, remember the children. Remember the children painted pictures of themselves, stick men and stick women in their pictures with the waters up to their neck. Remember the children throughout this testimony. Remember the children, as much as anyone, need culture. And so when the brother comes to us, when he comes to us from Mossville, Louisiana, or later on when we talk about the indigenous population from Houma, When Brother Tony, and I will say S to represent his last name, when Brother Tony S comes to us and talks about that population, when the brother from Mossville comes to us and tells us that they have poisoned the land, and if you get poisoned land, that means poisoned food, and since they organically grow their food, then that destroys their way of culture, then we must understand that this is a violation of the international covenants also, and those international covenants have been cited for you. They have poisoned the environment. They have created a situation where in the Mossville situation where they were hit by both Katrina and they were hit by Rita, one from one side of the world and the other from the other side, that most of their land was destroyed and that basically they had to live in trailers which were contaminated with formaldehyde, other agents of poison. This is in group 2 of our violation of human rights to resettle and to reintegrate and for internal displace in the situation of the Huma population. Remember this great legislation which occurred, or these ordinances which were passed after the population had been evacuated, after they had left. They voted to have 18 more offshore oil drilling facilities to come in, and these facilities and these oil rigs were already polluting the land and destroying the land that the people live on. These are also gross violations of human rights. Mark Fancher brought to us for the NCBL, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, not only the testimony of Mrs. Horn, but he also referenced other testimony that people had told him about the persons who were taken up into the helicopters and dropped from the sky and killed. But Mrs. Horn told us how she was unable to evacuate, she was refused access to the bridge. She said she went down by the bridge and she waited for 2 nights and no one came to rescue them, either her or her companions. People were laying on the bridge. Authorities never tried to rescue the people on the bridge so they went to the convention center. There were no lights, no food, bad conditions, sick people without care, people with seizures, children crying, old woman in the chair dead that they had covered up, dead bodies in the freezer. Dead bodies in the freezer. Let me pause for a moment here to reflect. Dead bodies in the freezer. So much of this testimony makes us to recall the past. Dead bodies in the freezer. Do we recall mass graves in Grenada with the invasion of the United States? The killing of the cohorts of Maurice Bishop and Maurice Bishop himself? Do we recall the atrocities and the bombing of the children and the marriage families in the Middle East by the United States?